The air in the grand dining hall of the Choi estate was so thick with dread you could taste it, metallic and cold like a coming storm. Every servant in the room held their breath. The cooks in the kitchen doorway, the cleaners polishing distant silver, even the security guards standing like statues by the towering oak doors, they all knew this silence. It was the silence that always came before the cruelty. Isabella, the fiancée of the formidable business magnate Mr. Min-jun Choi, stood in the center of the room, a vision of rage in an elegant red dress. Her face, usually a carefully constructed mask of beauty, was twisted with fury. Her target was the new maid, Chloe, a young woman of 20 whose light blue uniform seemed to absorb all the light in the room, leaving only the shadows. The crime? A single drop of water, accidentally spilled from a pitcher onto the pristine marble floor. For this, a punishment was deemed necessary. Isabella's hand, adorned with a diamond ring that could buy a house, was raised, poised to strike. Everyone flinched. Everyone braced for the sharp, humiliating crack of a slap that had become the soundtrack to their employment. But the sound never came. Instead, there was a different sound. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper of fabric as Chloe's own hand shot up, catching Isabella's wrist midair. The hold was not violent. It was not aggressive. It was simply firm, unyielding, like a root anchoring itself in stone. Everyone froze. Everyone stared. The world seemed to stop spinning. The gardeners outside the floor-to-ceiling windows paused, their shears hovering over rose bushes. The head housekeeper, a woman who had seen decades of quiet suffering, let out a tiny, involuntary gasp. No one had ever dared. No one had ever resisted. Isabella's eyes widened, first in shock, then in a blaze of pure, unadulterated fury. A low growl escaped her throat. The sheer audacity of it was a fire consuming her reason. But Chloe did not let go. Her eyes, dark and deep, held no fear. They held something else entirely. Something that looked like resolve. A whispered realization traveled through the silent staff like an electric current. This was different. This moment would change everything. But to understand how a single act of defiance from a new maid could threaten to bring down an entire empire of secrets and lies, we must go back. We must go back 3 weeks, to the day Chloe first walked through the gilded gates of the Choi estate, carrying a past that was far heavier than the small suitcase in her hand. For she was not just there to clean floors and serve meals. She was there on a mission, and stopping that slap was only the very first step. The real confrontation, the one that would expose a rot hidden deep within the heart of the family, was yet to come. The Choi estate was less a house and more a kingdom. Sprawling over acres of meticulously manicured land, the mansion was a monument to modern wealth, a fortress of glass, steel, and stone that seemed to rise from the earth itself. When Chloe first arrived, a bus pass and a crumpled piece of paper with the address in her pocket, the sheer scale of it was meant to intimidate. The guards at the gate, stern and impassive, surveyed her with suspicion. The long, winding driveway felt like a journey into another world, one where the rules she knew no longer applied. She was met at the door by Mrs. Park, the head housekeeper, a woman whose face was a roadmap of weary competence. Mrs. Park's tour was efficient and laced with unspoken warnings. She pointed out the priceless vases, the original artwork, the custom-made furniture. "Everything in this house is irreplaceable," Mrs. Park said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. But the true warning came when they reached the West Wing, Isabella's domain. Mrs. Park's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Miss Isabella, she values perfection. She has a specific way she likes things done. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact for too long. And above all, do not make mistakes." The warning hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Chloe simply nodded, her expression placid. "I understand," she said, her voice soft but clear. But inside, her heart was a steady, rhythmic drum. She was not intimidated. She was observing. She catalogued every detail, the nervous way the other maids scurried out of Isabella's path, the forced smiles they wore, the way their shoulders tensed whenever they heard her approaching footsteps. Chloe saw the fear that permeated the very walls of the mansion, a fear that was carefully hidden from its master, Mr. Minjun Choi. In the first week, Chloe witnessed Isabella's casual cruelty firsthand. She saw her dismiss a chef's week-long effort on a new menu with a flick of her wrist. She watched as Isabella berated a young gardener for a single weed in a flower bed the size of a small park. It was a tyranny of 1,000 tiny cuts, each one designed to remind the staff of their place, to reinforce her absolute power within these walls. Chloe performed her duties flawlessly. She was quiet, efficient, and invisible, just as she was supposed to be. But she was always watching. Her eyes would follow Isabella, not with the fearful deference of the others, but with a cool, analytical focus. She was studying her prey. She learned Isabella's routines, her habits, her triggers. She noted the arrival of her sister, Laura, a nervous, bird-like woman who seemed to live in Isabella's shadow, funded by her generosity and trapped by her temper. Chloe saw the guilt in Laura's eyes every time Isabella unleashed her venom on an undeserving staff member. This was not just a job. It was a reconnaissance mission. The light blue uniform was her camouflage. The duster and polish were her props. She was a soldier behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The other staff members mistook her silence for timidity, her youth for naivete. They felt sorry for her, this quiet girl who had no idea what she had walked into. They had no way of knowing that she knew more about the darkness in this house than any of them. She had come here seeking not a paycheck, but a reckoning. The pattern of abuse was a well-established rhythm in the Choi household, a secret symphony of terror that played out daily, always just out of sight of its powerful conductor, Minjun. He was a man who commanded industries and moved markets with a single phone call, yet he remained blissfully unaware of the petty kingdom of fear his fiancée had built within his own home. He saw Isabella as she presented herself to him, charming, intelligent, a perfect partner to stand beside him. He did not see the monster that emerged the moment his back was turned. A week before the confrontation in the dining hall, the staff witnessed a particularly ugly episode. Isabella had requested a specific brand of imported Belgian chocolate for a dessert. The head chef, a man with decades of culinary experience, had managed to procure it on short notice, but it was the 72% cacao version, not the 70% she had vaguely mentioned. When the dessert was presented, Isabella took one small bite. Her face, which had been smiling moments before as she chatted on the phone, hardened into a mask of contempt. She set her spoon down. "This is wrong," she said, her voice dangerously low. The chef was summoned from the kitchen, his white uniform immaculate, his face etched with confusion. "Is something the matter, Miss Isabella?" he asked. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the delicate mousse. "This is bitter. It's disgusting. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" The chef tried to explain the slight difference in cacao content, but Isabella cut him off. With a look of utter disdain, she picked up the crystal dessert bowl and, without a word, appended it onto the gleaming floor. The dark chocolate splattered across the white marble like a wound. "Clean it up," she hissed, not the chef, but at a young maid who stood trembling nearby. "And you," she said, turning back to the chef, her eyes cold as ice, "are an incompetent fool." "I'll be speaking to Minjun about your position here," the chef, a proud man, paled. His entire career, his reputation, was threatened over 2 percentage points of cacao. He simply bowed his head, defeated, and walked away. From a nearby hallway, Chloe watched the entire scene unfold. She saw Isabella's sister, Laura, flinch as the bowl hit the floor, her hand flying to her mouth. Laura's eyes met Chloe's for a fleeting second, and in them, Chloe saw a toxic cocktail of shame, fear, and complicity. Laura knew. She had always known. She was a silent witness, a beneficiary of the system, and her silence was its own form of poison. Chloe's resolve hardened. This was not just about Isabella. It was about all the people who enabled her, who stood by and let her reign of terror continue. It was about the imbalance of power that allowed one person's whim to destroy another's dignity. The spilled chocolate was a metaphor for the entire household, something beautiful and meticulously crafted, ruined by a single act of petulant rage. Chloe continued her work, her movements precise and calm, but a fire had been lit within her. She knew her time for quiet observation was coming to an end. The mission required more than just watching. It required action. The risk was enormous. She could be fired, blacklisted, or worse. But as she saw the young maid on her hands and knees, wiping up the chocolate with tears silently streaming down her face, Chloe knew it was a risk she had to take. The dignity of one was the dignity of all, and it was a price worth paying. We return to the present. The moment hangs suspended in time, fragile as spun glass. Chloe's hand is wrapped firmly around Isabella's wrist. The intended slap, an instrument of humiliation, has been neutralized. The power dynamic in the room has been flipped on its head. For a heartbeat, there is only the sound of breathing. Then, Isabella's shock melts into a tidal wave of incandescent rage. "How dare you," she seethed, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She tried to yank her arm away, but Chloe's grip was like steel. "You will let go of me this instant. You are fired. You will be thrown out of this house, and you will never work in this city again." The threats were familiar, the usual weapons in her arsenal. But this time, they had no effect. Chloe's gaze did not waver.
"No," she said.
The word was not loud.
It was not shouted.
But it landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. It was a word of absolute negation, a boundary drawn in solid rock. It was a word Isabella had likely never heard from a subordinate in her life.
"No."
Isabella repeated, her voice rising to a shrill shriek. "Who do you think you are?" The other servants began to back away, their terror palpable. They were not afraid of Isabella anymore. They were afraid for Chloe. They knew the vengeance that would follow such an act of defiance would be swift and terrible. Isabella opened her mouth to scream for the guards, to have this insolent girl physically removed, but just then, a new presence entered the room. It was Min-jun Choi. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who owned the world he walked on. He had been in his study, and hearing the commotion, had come to investigate. He stopped dead in the doorway, his sharp eyes taking in the scene in an instant. He saw his beautiful fiancée, her face contorted with rage, her wrist caught in the grasp of the new, young maid. He saw the terrified faces of his staff, frozen like a tableau of fear. His expression, usually calm and unreadable, hardened. A deep frown creased his brow. "What is going on here?" he asked. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a blade, demanding an answer. The authority in the room had shifted. It was no longer Isabella's. It was his. And he was not pleased. The silence that followed his question was heavier than any that had come before, pregnant with the unspoken truth and the lie that was about to be told. The entire household held its breath, waiting to see which one would win. Isabella was the first to react, her mind racing. She was a master manipulator, and her instincts for self-preservation were unparalleled. She immediately dropped the fury and adopted a mask of terrified victimhood. Her eyes welled with tears, her lower lip trembling. She wrenched her arm free, now that Chloe had slightly loosened her grip in the face of Min-jun's arrival. She stumbled towards him, a damsel in distress seeking refuge. "Min-jun, darling," she cried, her voice choked with fabricated sobs. "Thank God you're here. This girl, she just attacked me. For no reason. I was just asking her to be more careful, and she grabbed me. She threatened me." The accusation was stunning in its audacity. She painted Chloe as an unhinged aggressor, a violent intruder in their peaceful home. She looked at Min-jun with wide, pleading eyes, counting on his loyalty, his love, his inherent trust in her. The staff members, who had witnessed the truth, stared at the floor. Their fear of Isabella was still greater than their desire for justice. To speak up now would be to sign their own professional death warrant. Their silence was a weapon for Isabella, a confirmation of her lie. Minjun looked from Isabella's tear-streaked face to Chloe, who stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She had not moved. She had not flinched. She looked like the calm eye of a hurricane. "Is this true?" Minjun asked, his gaze fixed on Chloe. His voice was cold, judicial. He wanted to believe Isabella, the woman he planned to marry, but something was wrong. The scene did not make sense. The terror on his staff's faces was not the kind of fear one has for a beloved mistress who has just been attacked. It was the fear of a tyrant they dared not cross. Chloe met his gaze directly. There was no panic in her eyes, only a profound, unsettling stillness. "That is not what happened, sir," she said, her voice even and respectful, but laced with an undeniable strength. The simple, direct denial hung in the air, challenging Isabella's hysterical performance. Minjun was now deeply conflicted. On one hand, his fiancée, the woman he trusted. On the other, a new maid whose quiet dignity felt more truthful than Isabella's theatrical tears. He turned his gaze to the head housekeeper, Mrs. Park. "Mrs. Park, you were here. Tell me what happened." Mrs. Park's face went ashen. She was caught between her terrifying boss and her even more terrifying employer. She wrung her hands, her eyes darting between the floor and the wall, unable to look at anyone. Her silence was a confession in itself, a testament to the fear Isabella wielded. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a new voice spoke from the shadows near the grand entryway. "The girl is telling the truth." The voice was soft, aged, but it carried an authority that silenced everyone, including Minjun. From the alcove by the library door stepped an elderly woman. She was small and frail-looking, dressed in traditional, elegant silk. It was Mrs. Kim, Minjun's grandmother, the matriarch of the Choi family. She was a woman of immense respect and quiet power, the one person in the world Minjun revered without question. Her eyes, sharp and clear, were fixed on Isabella. "I saw everything." The arrival of Mrs. Kim was like a judgment from on high. Her presence fundamentally altered the chemistry of the room. She was the family's moral compass, a living repository of its history and honor. Her word was law, backed not by wealth or force, but by a lifetime of integrity. Isabella's face, which had been a carefully crafted portrait of a victim, began to crumble. A flicker of genuine panic entered her eyes. Mrs. Kim walked slowly into the center of the room, her gaze never leaving Isabella. She moved with a deliberate grace that belied her age, her silk slippers making no sound on the marble floor. Minjun bowed his head slightly in respect. "Halmoni," he said, using the Korean term for grandmother. "You are here?" "I've been here for some time," Mrs. Kim replied, her voice soft but heavy, each word landing with precision. She stopped beside Chloe, placing a gentle, reassuring hand on her arm before turning her full attention back to Isabella. "I was in the reading alcove. The doors were ajar. I saw the young woman, Chloe, carrying the water pitcher. I saw her stumble slightly. I saw a single drop of water fall to the floor. And then," she paused, letting the weight of her next word settle, "I saw you raise your hand to strike her." The statement was delivered not as an accusation, but as a simple, undeniable fact. It stripped away Isabella's entire narrative, leaving her lies exposed and shivering in the cold light of truth. The room was utterly silent. The staff, who had been too afraid to speak, now stood a little straighter. Their truth had been validated by the highest authority in the house. Isabella sputtered, trying to regain control.
"No."
"That's not. She's an old woman. She's confused." She didn't see it correctly. The disrespect was shocking. Minjun's face darkened, his disappointment in Isabella curdling into something colder. To insult his grandmother was an unforgivable sin. "Isabella," he warned, his voice dangerously low. But Isabella was desperate. She was a cornered animal, lashing out in every direction. She whirled around and pointed a trembling finger at her own sister, Laura, who had been trying to shrink into the wallpaper.
"Laura, tell them."
"You were here. You saw it." Tell them this maid is insolent and disrespectful. Tell them she has been causing trouble. It was a final, desperate gambit, turning to the one person she was certain she controlled. She was calling on her sister to lie for her, to perjure herself in front of the entire household and the family matriarch. Laura froze, pinned by Isabella's frantic gaze. All eyes in the room turned to her. She was the tie-breaking vote, the final witness. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. She looked at her sister's desperate, demanding face, then at Minjun's stony expression, and finally at Mrs. Kim's steady, knowing eyes. The weight of years of complicity, of silent guilt and buried shame, pressed down on her. The choice was clear: continue to enable her sister's cruelty, or finally, for once in her life, speak the truth. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. The fortress of lies Isabella had built around herself was beginning to show its first, fatal crack. Under the immense pressure of every eye in the room, Laura's carefully constructed composure shattered. A choked sob escaped her lips, the sound echoing in the cavernous hall. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling and broken. "I can't lie for you anymore." Isabella's face went slack with disbelief. This was the ultimate betrayal. Her own sister, the one person she had always controlled through financial dependency and emotional manipulation, was turning against her. "Laura, what are you saying?" Isabella hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. But Laura was no longer looking at her. Her gaze was fixed on Minjun, her eyes pleading for a strange kind of forgiveness. "She's always been like this," Laura confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and relief. "Ever since we were children. Phew. She likes to feel powerful by making other people feel small. The staff, they're all terrified of her. The chef, the gardeners, everyone. I saw what happened with the chocolate last week. I see it every day. I was too afraid to say anything." The confession hung in the air, a devastating indictment of Isabella's character. It wasn't just about the slap. It was about a deep, rotten pattern of behavior. Minjun's expression was unreadable, a mask of cold stone, but his grandmother, Mrs. Kim, simply nodded, as if Laura had only confirmed what she already knew to be true. The family drama had reached its zenith, a raw, open wound in the heart of the mansion. And then, at that precise moment of maximum emotional chaos, a new sound intruded. A sharp, insistent knocking from the massive front doors of the estate. The sound was jarring, an interruption from the outside world. A moment later, one of the security guards entered the dining hall, his face etched with uncertainty.
"Hoye portits mignon, bowing stiffly."
"Sir," the guard said, his voice low and urgent. "Forgive the intrusion. There is a man at the front gate. He will not leave. He insists on speaking with Miss Isabella." Minjun's eyes narrowed. "Who is he?" "He says his name is Daniel, sir," the guard replied, swallowing hard. He says it's about the accident." A sudden, deathly stillness fell over the room. If Laura's confession had been a crack in Isabella's facade, the name, Daniel, was a sledgehammer. The color drained from Isabella's face. She looked not just panicked, but utterly, primally terrified. Her eyes darted towards the door as if she expected a ghost to walk through it. It was a reaction of pure guilt. The name meant something. The past, a ghost she thought she had long since buried, had just arrived at her doorstep, demanding to be heard. Chloe, who had remained a pillar of calm throughout the entire ordeal, watched Isabella's reaction. A flicker of something, not triumph, but a somber confirmation, passed through her eyes. The next piece of her plan was falling into place, not by her design, but by the universe's own sense of timing. The external threat had arrived. The fortress was about to be besieged from the outside, as well as from within. Minjun's face was now an impenetrable mask. The man who controlled global markets was now facing a crisis in his own home that was spiraling far beyond a simple domestic dispute. His fiancée was a liar. His staff was terrified. And now, a mysterious man was at his gate. Speaking of an accident, he looked at Isabella's ghostly pale face, the sheer terror in her eyes, and knew this was no coincidence. The foundation of his world was cracking beneath his feet. "Let him in," Minjun commanded the guard. The order was quiet, but it had the finality of a judge's sentence. Isabella let out a small, strangled gasp.
Minyon, no.
"You can't. He's a nobody, a liar. He's just trying to extort money."
Her desperation only strengthened Minyon's resolve.
He gave her a look so cold it could freeze fire. "Then you should have no problem facing him," he said. The guard bowed and retreated. A few moments later, he returned, followed by a man. This was Daniel. He was not physically imposing. He was of average height and build, dressed in simple, clean clothes. But he walked with a slight, permanent limp, one leg dragging almost imperceptibly behind the other. The most striking thing about him were his eyes. They were not filled with rage, but with a cold, burning fire, the fire of a long-held injustice that had consumed his life. He ignored everyone else in the room. His gaze locked directly onto Isabella, and he did not blink. "Hello, Isabella," he said. His voice was steady, devoid of the emotion that had fueled Laura's confession. It was the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. Isabella shrank back, clutching Minjun's arm. "I don't know who you are," she lied, her voice thin and reedy. Daniel gave a bitter, humorless smile. "Oh, you know me. You just chose to forget. 5 years ago. A rainy night on a back road outside the city. A silver sports car going far too fast." He paused, letting the memory surface. "You hit me. You sent me flying into a ditch, shattered my leg, and broke 3 of my ribs. And then you drove away." The accusation was stark and horrifying. Minjun looked from Daniel's limping leg to Isabella's terrified face. Laura was openly weeping now, her hand over her mouth. "That's a lie." Isabella shrieked. "It was a drunk driver. The police caught him. He confessed." Daniel's cold gaze never wavered. "He confessed after you paid him $100,000 to take the fall. A desperate man with a family to feed. You ruined 2 lives that night, Isabella. Mine, and the life of the innocent man you sent to prison." The room was thick with the stench of a buried crime. It was a classic he said, she said. A respected, wealthy woman against a limping stranger with a wild story. In any other circumstance, Isabella's word would have prevailed. But too many lies had already been exposed that day. Her credibility was in tatters. Minjun looked at Daniel, then at Isabella. He was a man who dealt in facts, in evidence, in proof. He was being asked to make a judgment that would define the rest of his life, based on the word of a stranger against the woman he was supposed to love. Who was telling the truth? The fate of everyone in the room hung on that single, agonizing question. The standoff was absolute. Daniel's accusation, raw and horrifying, hung in the air against Isabella's frantic denials. Minjun stood at the center of it all, a judge in a courtroom that had once been his dining hall. He needed proof. His entire world was built on verifiable facts, and he would not let it be destroyed by unsubstantiated claims, no matter how compelling. It was at this moment of perfect impasse that Chloe finally spoke again. All eyes, which had been fixed on the drama between Isabella, Minjun, and Daniel, now turned to the young maid in the simple blue uniform. She had been the catalyst, the spark, but had remained a silent observer as the fire she started grew into an inferno. "He's telling the truth," Chloe said. Her voice was still quiet, but it now carried the undeniable weight of authority. It cut through the noise of Isabella's denials and Laura's sobs. Isabella whirled on her. You know nothing. You're just a maid. You weren't even here 5 years ago." Chloe took a slow, deliberate step forward. Her calm had not broken, but her eyes now held a deep, personal pain. "You're right. I wasn't here," she said, her gaze locking with Isabella's. "But my brother was." A collective gasp went through the room. The puzzle pieces began to click into place with horrifying speed. "The man you paid to take the fall," Chloe continued, her voice trembling with emotion for the first time. "The drunk driver who confessed. That was my older brother, Aaron. He wasn't a drunk. He was a good man, working 2 jobs to help our family. You destroyed his life for a crime he didn't commit. He has been in prison for 5 years because of you. The revelation was a bombshell. Chloe was not just a maid. She was a sister seeking justice. Her presence in this house was no accident. It was the culmination of a years-long plan. I knew you would never confess, Chloe said, her voice growing stronger. I knew the only way to prove what you did was to find evidence you thought no longer existed. Isabella laughed, a high, hysterical sound. Evidence? There is no evidence. It's his word against mine. It's your word against mine. You have nothing, don't I? Chloe asked softly. She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small, sleek smartphone. Her fingers moved deftly across the screen. You're very careful, Isabella. But you get careless when you think you've won. You threw out your old laptop 2 years ago when you upgraded. You thought you had the hard drive professionally wiped.
But they missed something.
A fragment. A corrupted audio file buried deep in the cache that they couldn't erase. She held up the phone. It took me weeks, working late every night after my shifts, but I recovered it. I put the pieces back together. She looked directly at Laura, Isabella's trembling sister. It's a phone call. A call you received from Isabella, just an hour after she left Daniel on the side of the road. Laura's face went white. She remembered the call. Chloe pressed play. A voice filled the silent room. It was unmistakably Isabella's, but younger, laced with a chilling, giddy arrogance. It's handled, the recorded voice said, tinny and distant. Some idiot in a beat-up truck will take the fall. He's getting a nice payday. God, Laura, you should have seen his face. He'll be a hero to his family. And that guy on the road? Please. He was probably just looking for a handout anyway. Then the most damning part. The recording captured Isabella's light, cruel laughter. The sound echoed in the dining hall, a ghost from the past confessing to a crime of breathtaking callousness. The hard proof had appeared. There was no more ambiguity. The truth stood naked and undeniable for all to see. The laughter from the phone faded, but the sound seemed to hang in the air, a toxic miasma that poisoned everything it touched. The silence that followed was absolute, a profound void where lies and denials used to be. Every person in the room, the cooks, the guards, Mrs. Park, Minjun, stared at Isabella, their expressions a mixture of horror, disgust, and dawning comprehension. The mask was not just cracked, it had been utterly obliterated. What was left was ugly, twisted, and indefensible. Isabella stood frozen, her face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. The recording was a ghost she never knew existed, a voice from a past she thought she had successfully murdered and buried. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time in her life, she had no words, no scheme, no escape route. She was trapped by the sound of her own voice, convicted by her own hubris. She slowly sank to her knees, not in remorse, but in the total, abject collapse of a queen whose kingdom has just been burned to the ground. Minjun looked down at the kneeling figure of the woman he had almost married. His face was not contorted with rage. It was worse. It was a landscape of cold, profound disappointment, and icy clarity. He looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time, and he was disgusted by what he saw. The love he had felt was extinguished, replaced by the chilling realization that he had given his heart to a monster. He turned away from her, a gesture of final, irrevocable dismissal. He walked over to Chloe and Daniel. He looked at Daniel's leg, at the pain etched into his face, and then at Chloe, at the quiet, powerful resolve in her eyes. He bowed his head deeply, a gesture of immense respect and profound apology. On behalf of my house and my own unforgivable ignorance, I am truly sorry, he said, his voice thick with shame. What was done to you and your brother is a stain upon my name, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to wash it clean. He then pulled out his own phone. He did not call his lawyers. He did not call his security team to dispose of the problem. He dialed the direct line of the city's chief of police. Commissioner, he said, his voice firm and unwavering. This is Minjun Choi. I need you to send a detective unit to my estate immediately. I have evidence pertaining to a 5-year-old hit-and-run case. And I am here with the perpetrator, who is ready to make a full confession. He gave a pointed look at the collapsed form of Isabella. The consequence was coming. Accountability, swift and unavoidable, had finally arrived. He then made another call, this time to his personal lawyer. He spoke to Daniel. I will fund the best legal team in the country to see your name cleared and your brother exonerated. I will personally cover all of his legal fees and yours. His release is my top priority. Furthermore, your medical care, your rehabilitation for the rest of your life, it is my responsibility. He looked at Chloe.
And you?
You are a woman of incredible courage and honor. You have brought truth into a house that was drowning in lies. Anything you or your family ever need, you'll have it. The engagement was over. The wedding was canceled. The reign of Isabella was finished. As police sirens began to wail in the distance, a sense of cleansing justice washed over the room. The air, once thick with fear, finally felt clean. The quiet maid, with nothing but her love for her brother and an unshakable belief in the truth, had done the impossible. She had brought an empire of deceit to its knees. The moral of the story was written on the faces of everyone present. Truth is a debt that must always be paid, and it will always find a collector, no matter how long it takes.